first reported in Mexico, as you recall. And back then, analyses were done, and they confirmed that the virus is an H1N1. And by May 5, there were 600 cases in Mexico, 25 deaths, and of these 5,600 cases, only 97 were confirmed as influenza H1N1. So I think I'd like you to point your attention that there was so much concern and panic that everyone who came to the ER with any illness or pneumonia or etc., they were labeled as, well, this is another case of H1N1, but those were not confirmed cases of H1N1. And now I think epidemiological studies are going back to analyze exactly how much of those were H1N1. To come back to how do we call the virus H1N1, this is the structure of the virus. This is an RNA virus, and it has two important proteins, neuraminidase and hemagglutinin. And these proteins are very important in the life cycle of the virus. And so therefore, when we say H1N1, it means that this protein is a type 1, H1, and this protein is an N1. So that's how the name H1N1 came about. What about the epidemic in the US? It started in April. Initially, there were 2 children from Southern California. The United States Department of Health and Human Services, they labeled this as a public health emergency because they felt that it might affect national security. By October, there were more than 378,000 cases of laboratory confirmed H1N1 influenza. If we come back to the pandemic level, you heard on the news that the level was raised to level 6 pandemic. What does this mean? This is the World Health Organization stand on the virus. So if we go to the phase 1 of the infectious disease is when you have the disease predominantly in animals. Phase 4 is when you have sustained human-to-human transmission. Phase 5 is when you have widespread human transmission. And then the difference between phase 5 and phase 6 is phase 6 when it spreads to more than 2 continents. And because H1N1 spread to more than 2 continents, it was labeled as a phase 6 level pandemic. As you see in the picture here, it's now spread all over the world. And the World Health Organization focus now has shifted. They are no longer keeping track of how many cases of H1N1 influenza are seen in each country. What they're keeping track of is of 2 things. In the countries where they have had previous cases, they're keeping track of those that develop high morbidity or mortality, the hospitalized patients, the ones who die. And in the countries, the few countries where there have not been cases before, they're keeping track of the new cases. Now, if we reflect back on the initial analysis of the pandemic of H1N1, there are some observations that we can make. The first one is that the virus is transmitted more efficiently than other influenza epidemics, meaning that if you are in contact with a person who has influenza H1N1, there is a 22 to 33% chance of getting the infection. But it's much less lethal than previous pandemic. The mortality of the 1918 pandemic was very high, and I think that was the initial concern about this pandemic, is that we're going to have a pandemic. If it's similar to the Spanish flu pandemic, it's going to cause a lot of death. But this is not what's happening. It's true that it's contagious, it's easily spread, but the cases are not causing death. So the fatality rate reported in the literature so far is 0.4%, so 4 out of 1,000. But in my opinion, this is an overestimation because there are a lot of cases who develop H1N1 influenza virus and they don't report to their doctor and they don't report to their Ministry of Health. So the total number of cases that we have in a particular country or county or whatever, I think is an underestimation. And therefore, when you calculate mortality based on reported cases. But if you are under-reporting, I think even the 0.4% is an inflated number. The attack rates seem to be higher in the 5 years to 24-year-old patients, but the ones that are getting more hospitalized are the very small children between the age of 0 and 4 years. And the highest mortality among individuals aged 25 to 49, this is from the data from Mexico. Now, in Mexico, it seems that they had high mortality in the middle-aged, young people. We don't know why is this different than the rest of the world, and obviously there are more and more analyses that are being done. Pregnant women seem to have much more complications than non-pregnant, and therefore special attention should be given to pregnant women. And if you ask me the question why, because pregnant women are considered immunosuppressed. The immune system of a pregnant woman is depressed compared to someone who is not pregnant, and therefore they are at a higher risk to catch infection, and they have less ability to fight infections. Now, another observation that has been made is that the people who were born before 1950 might be protected, and I keep the word might because I have seen patients born before 1950 who have had H1N1. But they seem to think that somehow around 1950, a similar virus has circulated and gave immunity to some people. As I mentioned, there are conflicting data between Mexico and the rest of the world. It seems like the mortality in Mexico was a bit different than the rest of the countries, and this again is being analyzed currently. Now, origin of the virus. Where did this virus come from? There are genetic studies. Obviously, to be able to answer this question, it needs very specific genetic studies. And it is believed that there is a quadruple reassortment, which means that 4 different viruses combined in the same host, in this particular case it's the pig, to form a new virus that is now transmitted, and it is the H1N1. So if you see in the schematic representation, there are 2 swine, 2 virus, 1 human, and 1 avian. All of them combined and created a new virus. And for this to happen, it means that all these 4 viruses should infect the pig at the same time for this virus to reassort and create a new virus. And so this is a more schematic representation. So if you have a bird flu virus, a swine flu virus, and a human flu virus, and they have different proteins, different genetic material. So if these combine into the pig, then you have a new virus that can now be transmitted to a human, and from one human, the virus can spread to other humans. No need to kill the pigs. There is no risk of becoming infected with influenza virus from eating pork. I think what happened in Egypt really is completely unjustified when they went in on a plan to kill all the pigs in the country. That is not how we that's not how we control the swine flu or H1N1 influenza. Now we come back to, that was a general overview. I'd like now to come back to the situation of H1N1 influenza in Lebanon. Many of you know that the first cases that we heard about were in May. And basically there were 22 Lebanese people who went to Spain, and over there in Spain, they were exposed to cases of the virus. And the first case that was confirmed in Lebanon was in May 30. And actually we had 3 cases confirmed in May 30. By July 10 we had 60 cases, but the majority had come from abroad, from many places. We had many cases coming from Greece, from Cyprus, from Spain, from the US, from Canada. By August 18, there were 568 cases, but the transmission had shifted.